Thank you and aloha. Thank you for joining us for this special episode of Skep Live Online, a production of University of Hawaii Presents, based at the University of Hawaii at Manoa Outreach College. My name is Tim Slaughter, your host this evening. I'd like to thank our sponsors, the Hawaii State Foundation of Culture and the Arts, the National Endowment for the Arts, the University of Hawaii, Kainoa Senior Services, and you, our audiences. Tonight and next week, we are continuing the Fall International Storyteller series in collaboration with the Hawaii Book and Music Festival. Next week, we'll have tellers on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday mornings at 10 a.m. But tonight is all about the spookiest stories possible. We're excited to have you join us, so give us your spookiest comments through today's chat window and let us know what you're thinking. Tonight we have three of the spookiest tellers in Hawaii, and we're happy to have them here with us. Alton Chung, Kathy Collins, and Jeff Gear. Well, tonight we're starting with Alton Chung. Local boy Alton Takiyama-Chung grew up with the stories, superstitions, and the magic of the Hawaiian Islands. He tells stories of the Plantation Days, the Japanese-American experience of World War II, Asian folktales, Hawaiian legends, and of course, ghost stories. He has been a featured teller at the National Storytelling Festivals and in international storytelling festivals in the Cayman Islands, Singapore, Vietnam, India, and Thailand. He's also former chair of the Board of Directors of National Storytelling Network, the national organization for storytellers in the United States. So please put your hands together for a virtual round of applause for Alton Chung.
Oh, thank you so very much. Now, Dr. Glenn Grant spent over 30 years collecting and telling strange stories from Hawaii, and it seemed right that on Halloween we should honor him by telling one of his stories. This story is called The Sobbing Spirit of Punahou Street, and it's told with the permission of his estate. Denise Endo had a problem, and she went to see Dr. Grant for his help. At the beginning of the school year, she had moved into a one-bedroom apartment on Punahou Street, Makiki, with a friend with whom she had grown up on the island of Kauai. She was concerned that her roommate had become obsessed with a Ouija board, which she had used to make contact with a spirit of a young woman in their house. It's so bizarre, the way my roommate is acting. I mean, I've heard that Ouija boards can be dangerous. Do you think you might be able to come over tonight and check it out? She and her boyfriend will be home about 9 p.m. or so, and I know they're going to be playing with the board. I mean, they always do it every single night. Well, within a few weeks of moving into the apartment, both Denise and her roommate began to hear the sobbing of a woman in their bedroom at night. At first, they assumed that the crying was coming from the next unit over. The young professional couple who lived indoor must have had an argument, and the wife was really upset. I mean, the sobbing coming through the wall was so loud that both Denise and her roommate could hardly get any sleep. A few nights later, they were woken again in the early morning by the sound of a woman crying next door. Now, the wall is like concrete cinder block. It was too thick for them to hear what the argument was about, but the sobbing was clearly audible, and the woman was deeply saddened and in pain. Now, the sobbing sounds continued intermittently until finally, building up her nerve, Denise discreetly asked her neighbor whether she was all right. My roommate and I are a little concerned because we sometimes hear you crying. Have you not been well? The woman assured Denise that she was fine, and then if Denise was hearing crying, it wasn't coming from her. Now, about a month later, the couple who lived next door, they went on vacation. I mean, the apartment was empty. Lights were turned off and the door secured and locked. Yet, Denise and her roommate were once again awoken by the sound of a woman crying. It was then that they realized that the sobbing sounds were not coming from this world. Well, Denise's roommate and the roommate's boyfriend decided to use a Ouija board to try and find out the history of the sobbing in the apartment. First, Denise joined in as if it were a game, but one night when they asked, "Who is the spirit that cries in our apartment?" the board spelled out A-L-I-C-E. Alice. After a while, her roommate became obsessed with a spirit called Alice. She began having nightly conversations with Alice, who spelled out all kinds of messages about her life. Denise felt that Alice had become the third tenant of the apartment. Well, that evening, Denise introduced Dr. Grant to her roommate, a stunningly beautiful woman by the name of Alton Chung. Chantel earned her living as a model and as a roaming Waikiki photographer. With her boyfriend, Chris Wong, She had set up a small photography business. I mean, Chantel would visit exclusive nightclubs and restaurants in Waikiki and take photographs of romantic couples sitting at their table. She would then drop the roll of film off at Chris's nearby office, and he would develop the pictures in time to return to the couples before they left the restaurant. Now, the Ouija board was set up on a small folding Japanese-style table in the bedroom, and several large candles had been lit to give that room this warm glow. Chantel asked if Alice was in the room, and the planchette floated around the board with her fingers resting lightly on that triangular piece of plastic, and suddenly it flew to yes. Ah, good. Okay, she's here. Aloha, Alice. This is your Chantel. Are you here? Yes. May I ask some questions? Asked Dr. Grant. Oh, of course. Your name is Alice? Yes. Did you die in this room? No. You died somewhere else? No. So you did die in this room? No. Did you die in this place? Yes. Did you die a long time ago? Yes. Can you tell us the year? Well, the planchette flew to the number 9 and then slid to the number 8 and remained silent and just stopped moving. 1898. Yes. Did you die violently? No. Did you die in an accident? No. Did you commit suicide? No. Did you die peacefully? No. Were you murdered? No. Did you die of a broken heart? Yes. Did your husband die? Were you a widow? No. Did your husband desert you? No. Did your husband cheat on you? The planchette began spinning crazily around the board, moving this direction, that direction, and finally it flew out of their grasp, popped off the board, and slammed into the wall. Shaken, they recovered that planchette and placed it back on the board. Did your husband cheat on you? Planchette remained motionless. Was your husband a bad man? Yes. Did he hit you? Yes. Why have you come back into this room? The planchette moved to the letter C. You came to see Chantel? Yes. Why? Why did you want to see her? The planchette moved to the letter F. You want her to do you a favor? No. Do you want me to be your friend, Alice? Yes. Why? Why do you need Chantel to be your friend? Planchette remained motionless. Alice did not answer any more questions that night. Well, later that evening, Dr. Grant had a cup of coffee with Denise at a coffee shop on Kapiolani Boulevard. And Denise mentioned that the sobbing had stopped since they started using the Ouija board to speak to Alice. And Dr. Grant asked Denise about Chantel. Now, Chantel's father had deserted her mother shortly after she'd been born. And in high school, she had a boyfriend who was very insecure about her maturing good looks. At 16, she began doing some modeling for hotel brochures. This angered her boyfriend. And sometimes he hit her. One of the reasons why she moved to Oahu with Denise was to get away from him. The pattern was beginning to make sense to Dr. Grant. The spirit of an abused, broken-hearted woman felt a connection with a young, beautiful, living woman who had suffered the same type of abuse. Dr. Grant also did some research on the history of Punahou Street. Around 1898, there were many exclusive mansions on that tree-lined street between Baratania Street and Wilder Avenue. On the Waikiki side of the street were the Dillinghams, the Whitneys, and the Spreckles. And on the Eva side, there were the Wiedemans, the Friers, the Beckers, the Alexanders, and the Dorsets. These were the money classes of Honolulu's elite society, and they ruled over the islands with an iron fist. But Dr. Grant was never able to determine who resided at the precise location of Denise's apartment. Now, the term ended, Dr. Grant lost contact with Denise, but he ran into her again at registration for the next term. So, how's the sobbing ghost? I'm ready to move out if Chantel doesn't start fooling around with that Ouija board. It's like she's a different person. Every night, instead of going out with her friends or with Chris, she sits with that witch board till the early morning hours. I mean, Alice and Chantel have become such good friends that there's no room for anyone else. I mean, it's so weird. If I've moved out of the bedroom, I've moved into the living room so she can have the bedroom all to herself. I won't go in there. Please, Dr. Grant, do you think you might be able to convince her to let that entity go back to the other world? Well, Chantel was not pleased. She was convinced that Alice was her guardian spirit. Dr. Grant persisted, and a second seance was set. The oracle board was set up, lights lowered, candles lit. Alice, can you tell us your last name? There's no response. What was your address on Punahou Street? No response. Did you know your neighbors? Yes. Can you spell their names? No response. What was your husband's name? Oh, Alice never speaks about her husband. Well, if the spirit can't give us its surname, Chantel, then maybe it isn't a ghost after all. I mean, I've done some research and I can't verify any of the information Alice has given us. I mean, if she can give me the name of a neighbor or her husband's name in 1898, then maybe I might be able to believe her. Otherwise, maybe we aren't dealing with the spirit at all. Oh, Chantel's eyes blazed with anger at the suggestion that her friend wasn't whom she claimed to be. Even more determined to prove that the spirit was real, she started to put her hands back on the planchette. Everyone turned their attention back to the Ouija board when suddenly the planchette, with no fingers touching it, moved by itself. Denise screamed! At that instant, a bright flash went off in the darkened room. Chris, the consummate photographer, had taken a photograph of the planchette just as Denise screamed. The device did not move again. Chantel was furious with everyone for even doubting Alice's existence. She ordered everyone out of the room. She slammed the door and locked herself in with the witchboard and Alice. Chris tried to apologize through the locked door, but there was no response. Well, he excused himself, said goodnight, and saying that he had lots of work to do in his darkroom. Well, the next morning, Dr. Grant received a frantic phone call from Denise asking him to meet her at Chris's tiny Waikiki photo studio on Lewis Street. Well, when he arrived, he saw Chris and his friends carrying out a lot of photographic equipment out of his office, and he also noticed a scorched enlarger and burnt carpet in the nearby dumpster. Chris had a fire in his darkroom last night. It was so bizarre, and I'm terrified. I can't go back to that apartment. Not after what happened last night. Last night, after he left the seance, Chris had gone to his office to get some work done. It was after midnight when Chris decided to develop that roll of film with a photograph of the Ouija board. And after developing and hanging the negative to dry, he started getting the enlarger ready when he noticed that the red darkroom light would begin swinging back and forth, back and forth. And then the enlarger began to rattle, and the walls of the darkroom began to shake. It felt as if he was in an earthquake. Chris ran to the darkroom door, tried to leave the building, but the door wouldn't open. It was jammed or caught in the frame. Now, Chris is a big guy, and he threw his whole weight against the door, but it didn't budge. And as the rumbling continued, he heard a little pop, like a firecracker. And he saw that the red darkroom light had exploded, and a tiny burst of flame had fallen onto several rolls of film hanging to dry. And that film just flared up. And unbelievably, that broken light bulb began spewing little bits of flame. These tiny balls of flame ignited the carpet and the blackout curtains and the table upon which the enlarger sat. In moments, that darkroom was filled with thick, toxic smoke and leaping flames. Well, Chris grabbed the fire extinguisher, and in moments, the flames were smothered with life-saving white foam. Well, with the fire out, Chris turned toward the door, which opened, this time without any resistance. Chris believed that an evil spirit had followed him to his office. Something wanted to burn him to death. The wall shaking, the door jamming, the light bulb bursting. Just too much of a coincidence. There had been no earthquake on Oahu that night. But Chris's office was in an old building with an ancient central air conditioning system which rattled and shook when it started up. Chris had cobbled together the door to the darkroom with spare lumber. Old doors can freeze and light bulbs do explode. But despite Dr. Grant's rational explanation, Denise pleaded with him for help to get Chantel away from that Ouija board. Dr. Grant's only remedy was to call Sylvia Crabb, a Hawaiian woman who was a trance medium, a person who allowed spirits of the dead to literally speak through her. Dr. Grant told Sylvia the entire story, and she agreed to look into the pelekia, the trouble. Although she was native Hawaiian, well-versed in ancient kahuna rituals, Mrs. Crabb's spirit guide was an ancient Native American shaman named Owanda, who had lived in the Pacific Northwest. Well, Chantel leapt at the opportunity to actually speak with her Alice. A space was cleared in the room, a table set and several chairs set up in a circle. It was Mrs. Crabb, her husband Mr. Crabb, Denise, Chris, Chantel, and Dr. Grant. We're all seated around the table. Now, Chantel insisted that the Ouija board be placed in the center of the table, saying that Alice told her that the board had to be present whenever the medium was there. Mrs. Crabb took one look at that board and ordered it out of her presence, saying that such devices were dangerous in the hands of novices who knew nothing about the spiritual powers with which they were tampering. She compared it to giving a child a loaded assault rifle with the safety off. Now, taking her place in the circle, she fell into a deep, sleep-like trance, which for what seemed like 15 minutes. Several in the circle had begun to yawn, and half suspecting that Sylvia had nodded off too. And when she began to snore, everyone had to pinch themselves to keep from laughing. Until the snore softened into a sob, which emanated from her throat as if it were a long, hollow tube. Denise froze. Chantel smiled. The sob coming from Mrs. Crabb was the same as that which they first heard in their apartment. Chantel, are you with me? Oh, I am the one in life called Alice. Oh, I have suffered much in this world. Oh, my dear sweet friend, you have been so good to me. You are my darling friend. It's time for you to leave this earthly plane. It was Mr. Crabb, who had said nothing until now. He tried to coax Alice from the apartment. Oh, but I wish to stay with Chantel. Without her, I would be so lonely. At that moment, another voice suddenly entered Mrs. Crabb. This voice was deep, manly, and began to fill the room. It is Owanda, Mrs. Crabb's spirit guide, said Mr. Crabb. Beware! Beware! Alice is not the spirit of a woman. It is a man! A horrified scream came from Chantel. She fell backwards onto the floor. And then she was hurled across the floor into a corner of the room. She was knocked unconscious, her head snapping up against the wall. Her head then began to jerk from side to side as something was slapping her face. As she uttered a deep moan and her whole body trembled. Don't touch her! She is mine! The room was filled with a torrent of the demon's filthy words and all the things that he was going to do to Chantel. Everyone nearly just fell out of their chairs, but the incident ended as quickly as it had begun. The profanity from Mrs. Crab's mouth ceased and was followed by a profound silence. Later that night, Mrs. Crab explained what had happened. She understood that Owanda had come to warn them that the spirit of a sobbing woman, who had been the woman's husband, who had driven the wife to an early grave after years of abuse. When the spirit felt Chantel in the apartment, he seduced her through her open-hearted empathy for abused women, and he used that camaraderie to get close to her, and he used that Ouija board as his portal into this world. Now that his true identity had been revealed, the gateway to this world had been shut by Mrs. Crab's spirit guides, at least for the time being. The Ouija board was taken to the parking lot, placed in a garbage can, doused with lighter fluid, and burnt. The ashes were then ceremonially buried in the yard of the apartment building. Chantel and Denise moved out of the apartment, which was blessed by Mrs. Crab for the safety of future occupants. Chris and Chantel were married a couple years later. About a month after the seance, Dr. Grant received a small envelope from Chris Wong that contained a short note and a photograph. On the night of the fire in his darkroom, the negative of the Ouija board had not been destroyed. He printed a copy for Dr. Grant, and at the bottom of the note he scribbled, "Look at the Ouija board with a magnifying glass. Tell me what you think, Chris." In the photograph, the Ouija board is on that low table. The planchette is in the position where it had come to rest after moving all by itself. Denise and Dr. Grant are in the photo looking surprised as they just see this device move under its own power. Under closer inspection, there is something truly remarkable. On the planchette is a large, manly finger. It was clearly touching the planchette. But where it should have been connected to a hand, it faded away to nothingness. Although he loved collecting uncanny photographs, Dr. Grant burned this picture of a finger from hell.
Thank you, Alton. That was absolutely fabulous. And I know everybody out there just thoroughly enjoyed that story. Let's give Alton Chung a warm virtual round of applause. Well, if you're not scared yet, you will be soon. Let's move on. Next, we have Kathy Collins.
I'm scared.
And I know you're going to scare us too, Kathy. Since the age of 13, Maui girl Kathy Collins has performed as a storyteller, stage and film actress, radio and television personality, stand-up comic, MC, and dancer. She's also a newspaper columnist and freelance writer. With her pidgin-speaking alter ego, Tita, she has talked story across the state and the mainland. from the Hawaii Book and Music Festival to the Lincoln Center Outdoors Festival. So put your hands together and welcome Kathy Collins.
Thank you, Tim. You know, the first time I met Alton Chung, the first time I saw him perform, he absolutely captivated me with his telling of Okiku, a classic Japanese obake tale. And there are several variations on this story, some quite different from others, but my favorite version will always be the one that Alton told that night, some 20 years ago, I believe. And that is the version that I will tell this evening, although I hope I can do it justice, Alton. The story takes place in Japan over 400 years ago at the great Himeji Castle, which still stands to this day near the city of Kobe. This magnificent mountain stronghold was comprised of 83 wooden buildings, which housed the shogun and his entourage. And among the hundreds of retainers at Himeji was a beautiful young lady in waiting named Okiku. Okiku was beautiful inside and out. She was soft-spoken, gentle, loyal. Her favorite color was purple. She always wore a purple kimono. And her manner of dress perfectly matched her countenance. Simple but elegant in a subtle, understated sort of manner. Okiku was assigned to the household of Lord Aoyama, who was second in command only to the shogun himself. But unlike the ruler, Aoyama's soul was as dark and cold as the depths of the forest. Lusted after the lovely Okiku, but she always refused his advances, politely, of course. Her heart belonged to a young samurai. He was a member of the shogun's personal guard. His name was Taketsune. Well, one day, Okiku was dusting the decorative scrolls that hung in a corridor of Aoyama's private quarters when she overheard the Lord speaking in hushed tones. Now, she didn't mean to eavesdrop, but the tone of his voice was so furtive and sinister and urgent that she couldn't help but pay attention. And she was shocked to hear that Aoyama was plotting to assassinate the shogun. Involuntarily, she let out a little gasp, and Aoyama rushed to the shoji screen door, slid it open, and saw nothing except perhaps a tiny flicker of purple fabric fluttering around the corner. He walked up and down the hallways looking this way and that, but saw no one. And by the time he returned to his room and sat back down with his co-conspirator, Okiku had run through the compound to warn Taketsune. The shogun had been planning an outing for the next day, a rare outing, and Taketsune, of course, was assigned to accompany the shogun. Okiku was too frightened to admit that she had overheard Aoyama. In fact, she was too scared to even mention him by name. But she told Taketsune urgently that she just had a bad feeling about this outing the next morning, and if they were indeed to go through the forest, that he should be especially vigilant, for she just had a premonition that the shogun might come to harm. Well, the next day, Taketsune, heeding Okiku's advice, volunteered to be a member of the lead party, and he was able to spot the attackers in their hiding places. And in the ensuing fight, all of the would-be assassins were killed, and there was no one to trace the nefarious plot back to Aoyama. Well, the wicked lord was furious and a bit fearful. But as the hours passed and no one came to confront him about his possible role in the plot, he turned his attention to figuring out just who had betrayed him. In his mind, he recalled the events of the previous day over and over, and he kept seeing in his mind's eye that little flash of purple. And he realized that perhaps the young lady in waiting was the one who had informed the shogun's men of the plot. So he devised a plan to confirm his suspicions. He summoned Okiku to his private chambers, where he had laid out on a table 10 beautiful hand-painted plates encrusted with jewels, each one more beautiful than the next. As she entered the room, he observed her carefully, and his cunning animal instinct could sense the fear in her walk, although she never showed it on her face. He invited her to sit at the table and explained that the plates, this collection of beautiful ornamental plates, was one of his prized possessions. It was a gift from the shogun himself. And he told Okiku that because of her trustworthiness, her goodness, her honesty, her loyalty, he was entrusting this valuable collection to her. One by one, he took the plates, wrapped each in silk, and placed them into a large strong box. And he asked her to serve them some tea. And as she turned from the table to fetch the tea set, he quickly removed the top plate from the box, hid it under a cushion beneath the table, sipped his tea, closed the box, locked it with a key, and handed the key to Okiku. She obediently tucked the key into her obi and took the strong box back to her own quarters. Well, a few days later, Lord Aoyama wanted to host a dinner party for some visiting dignitaries, and naturally he wanted to show off his prized collection of plates. So he asked Okiku to bring the box to his dining hall. She removed the key from her obi for the first time, unlocked the box, and one by one removed the plates, counting them as she unwrapped them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, they were such beautiful plates. She carefully laid each on the table so that his guests would be able to admire each of them. 7, 8, 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. She looked in the box again. She ruffled through the silk wrappings, and Aoyama said, "Well, where's the 10th plate?" I do not know, sir. I have not opened this box since you entrusted it to me. I don't know what could have happened. You liar! Thief! And what a fool. Did you think I would not notice that you had kept one of these beautiful plates for yourself? I hereby banish you from Himeji Castle. And he summoned his guards, and 2 men came, took her each by the arms, and dragged her off to her quarters. She had enough time only to gather a few of her meager possessions and a little lantern. And roughly they shoved her out of the great wooden doors of Himeji Castle. She hadn't even time to say goodbye to her beloved Taketsune. Bewildered and frightened and humiliated, Okiku stumbled down the path alone into the dark forest. The flickering light from her feeble lantern danced off the shadows, and she could swear she saw pairs of yellow eyes peering at her in the darkness. The branches of the menacing trees clutched at her kimono, and suddenly A heavy thud on the back of her head knocked her unconscious, and the last thing she was aware of was the smell of wet moss as she crumpled onto the forest floor. When she awoke, it might have been minutes or hours later, she was vaguely aware of a strange sensation of weightlessness, as if she were floating in mid-air. And as she struggled to regain her eyesight, she saw that her hands were bound together at the wrists before her, and she was indeed hovering in mid-air, suspended by a rope around her waist. As her eyes started to focus, she recognized her surroundings. She was hanging over a deep, dry well in an abandoned courtyard of Himeji Castle. Ha! So the thief awakens. Although Okiku's eyesight and mind were still rather fuzzy, she could clearly see the anger and hatred in the Lord's face. Please, my Lord, please forgive me for my carelessness. I do not know what happened to your plate. You fool! You think I care about a stupid plate? I must know. It was you who foiled my plot, wasn't it? To assassinate the shogun. It was you, wasn't it? Who did you tell? Tell me, who did you tell? No one. I told no one. I swear. Please, please, you're my Lord. I told no one. Ha! Perhaps this will loosen your tongue. And he removed his sword and with one swift stroke sliced Okiku's hands at her forearms. And Okiku could only watch in mute horror as her hands, still bound together at the wrists, tumbled into the darkness below. The blood spurted from her severed stumps, keeping time with her hammering heartbeat. Aoyama was totally unmoved. What good is a maid without hands? And once again he drew his sword, and this time he sliced through the rope which held her aloft. He didn't even bother to wait to hear her body hit the bottom. Whether she died instantly on impact or slowly bled to death mattered nothing to him. Satisfied that his secret now lay at the bottom of the abandoned well, he went back to his chambers and enjoyed a good night's sleep. Well, a few days later, the guards on night duty began to whisper about a horrible wailing sound that they had heard coming from the abandoned east end of the castle. And one guard, who had had the courage to go and investigate, spoke of seeing a purple specter floating about the empty corridors and wandering through the courtyard. Well, Aoyama dismissed all of that as superstitious nonsense, gossip. But one night, exactly a week after he had killed Okiku, he was awakened and he suddenly sat up in bed by this horrible shriek. And as he fumbled for his lantern, he could see a roiling mass of green vapor seeping into his chambers from beneath the shoji door. As he lit his lantern, he heard the steady drip, drip, drip of water, and he could feel his feet at the end of the futon becoming clammy and cold. And as the light shone, he was horrified to see that his futon was soaked wet with blood, and a crimson trail of droplets led to the door. He leapt out of bed and he flung open the door and called for his guard. And when the young soldier came running in, he said, "My lord, what is wrong?" He says, "What do you think? Look, how could you let this happen? Did you not hear anything?" I heard nothing, sir." "Well, look at this." And Aoyama turned to point back at his blood-soaked futon, and it was a little rumpled, but clean and dry. And so were the tatami mats. Not a drop of blood. After that night, Aoyama could barely sleep or eat. Day after day, he seemed to descend into madness, and he started wasting away. Now the whisperings throughout Himeji Castle centered on the obvious deterioration of Lord Aoyama. Taketsune cared nothing about all of that. He was beside himself with grief over the disappearance of his beloved Okiku, and no one else in the household seemed to know what had happened. She had just vanished one night. He wanted to ask Lord Aoyama, but Aoyama seemed like a madman, muttering to himself, just striding up and down the corridors. Well, one night, the night of the full moon, Taketsune suspected that this specter that people had been seeing, dressed in purple, might possibly be his lover. So he crept to the abandoned courtyard in the east wing of Himeji Castle, and he hid himself behind a low stone wall, and he waited. He dozed off, but precisely at the hour of the ox, 2 a.m. by our clocks. This is the time when the lines between the living and the dead become blurred. He was awakened by a sobbing sound, a woman crying. And as he peered over the stone wall, looking at the abandoned well, he saw this specter of a young woman rising up. She was wearing a purple kimono, but it was tattered and dirty and soiled, and her long black hair hung loose, covering her face. He could see that she carried a strong box between her forearms, for she had no hands. And she placed the box on the ground next to the well, and with the bloody stumps, pushed the hair out of her face. He saw that it was indeed his beloved Okiku. Speechless, he watched as the ghost opened the box and began removing plates, one at a time, counting as she went. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. One, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. One, 2. Poor Taketsune, in his hiding place, was frozen in horror. At least he knew for certain that his beloved Okiku had perished, but worst of all was the anguish, the agony on her face, and he longed to run to her, to rescue her, but he was paralyzed. And the ghost kept counting and wailing. 6, 7, 8. Oh! And then out of the shadows stumbled a haggard and emaciated Aoyama, dragging his sword behind him, shouting at the ghost, "Stop! Stop counting! You are dead! I killed you myself! You are dead!" And he slashed at the specter with his sword, but the sword only sliced through the vapor, and the ghost kept counting. 1, 2, 3. Stop counting! I swear you are dead! 7, 8. Why won't you stay dead? 1, 2, 3. Aoyama was a madman, slashing and slashing, and it did no good. 7, 8, 9, 10. Aoyama reached into his crumpled cloak and threw the missing plate through the ghost. And as the plate clattered onto the stone walkway, the wailing stopped, and a look of peace replaced the anguish on the young ghost's face. Almost as immediately, Taketsune felt freed from his paralysis, and he leapt over the stone wall and rushed to Aoyama. "Ah! You killed her!" Aoyama said, "Yes, and now I know my suspicions have been confirmed. It was the two of you who foiled my plot. Ha! Yes, your beloved Okiku is dead, and now you shall join her." Driven by hatred and fueled with fury, Aoyama summoned every last bit of strength he had, lifted his sword to slash Taketsune. But before he could strike, the voice of the shogun himself rang out through the courtyard. "Aoyama!" The shogun stepped out, flanked by several of his guards. I too had my suspicions, and now they have been confirmed. "Guards, take him away." The soldiers dragged a sobbing Aoyama off to the dungeon, and the ghost slowly rose from her knees and bowed deeply to the shogun. And then she turned to her lover and bowed once again. And then, with a look of serene beauty on her face, the ghost of Okiku vanished into the moonlight, never to be seen or heard from again. And that is the classic tale of Okiku and the 9 plates.
Thank you so much, Kathy. Another beautiful but horrifying story for you, everyone, tonight. So that was Kathy Collins. Please, virtual round of applause for Kathy. And now, those are the spirits clapping as well. And now, moving on to last but not least, we have Jeff Gear. Jeff is celebrated for his physical style of storytelling, his chorus of different voices and rubbery face as drama specialist for the Parks and Recreation Department. For 28 years, he produced the Talk Story Festival, Talk Story Radio, and Story TV. He performs regularly across Hawaii and internationally in countries including Guam, Samoa, Spain, Canada, Taiwan, Thailand, India, China, and Romania. Now let's welcome Jeff Gear, whose birthday also happens to be today. So here we go.
Right.
Jeff Gear.
It's my birthday. It's a pleasure to celebrate with Alton and with Kathy and with Tim and Em. I'm 32. Trick or treat. Well, the evening is getting late and those stories are really wicked and weird. So just as a little taster to change the mood a little bit, once upon a time, I was a fourth grade teacher at Our Lady of Sorrows Wahiwa School, Catholic school, obviously, Our Lady of Sorrows. I was the fourth grade teacher, and it was Halloween, and I was driving up the hill, going past the food land when I remembered the pumpkin contest. And I quickly ran into the food land parking lot, ran into the store, the big bin where all the pumpkins used to be. There were only like 5 little scrawny ones, the ones that were all bent up and rejected by everybody else, the fat ones and the squished ones and the oblong ones and the green ones. But that's all there was. So I bought them up and I went to my classroom and all the kids are like, these ones are ugly. They're not very good. These are the worst ones I ever saw. I never saw. I said, you guys don't get it. These are the pumpkins I've been looking for. They're the ones with personality. You look at your pumpkin and you find the face that's inside of that beautiful shape, that weird shape. The weird ones are the ones that are going to win this contest. Go on, get to work. And of course, we won all awards that year because it's the weird ones that get the prize. This story hid in my subconscious for 25 years. It happened on Oahu when I was producing the Talk Story Festival, a big event. We had 500 or 600 people down at McCoy Pavilion every year. Kathy was part of it. Alton was part of it. Both of them, lots they participated. And well, many of the years, especially in the 90s and early 2000s, the festival would be followed by a tour of the neighbor islands. And this was one of those events. And when it happened, I forgot about it. I forgot about it for 25 years until during COVID times, I was watching the TV show, virtual storytelling, Northlands, Alton will know. And this story came back through my head. It happened to be an open mic, and I told the story that I remembered just the moment before. And that's my new spooky story that I will share with you. So we were in the car. I was touring, as I said. We were in Makawao, Upper Maui. There was, I remember, Sandra McLeese was in the car. Makia Malo was in the car. Makia Malo died this October, 1 week short of his 85th birthday. He was Makapo, blind, always wore sunglasses, stumpy fingers because he suffered and survived Hansen's disease or leprosy. Fantastic heart, brilliant mind. And he just looked ugly and he couldn't walk very well. So I was like the guide dog on these tours. I made sure he didn't stumble or bump into something. There was a guide dog, but the guide dog needed to be guided. So I was the guide dog. Ha, ha, ha. And this was one of those weird mornings, a Saturday morning when we didn't have a gig. That was rare because on these tours, I like to work them hard. And we're driving from Makawao to Pukalani along the little country road. There's some horses and open fields and housing projects here and there. And I see a little sign, garage sale. Who doesn't like a garage sale? So pull over the van. The others get out. I got to go around and get Makia out. Takes a little while, as I say. He's kind of unstable. We cross the road. The rest are ahead of us, and I walk in behind them with Makia. And I'm walking into a carport, and I'm seeing dog poop, lots of dirt, some scraggly T-shirts and an Aloha shirt and some games. I hear a voice up the little stairs going into the kitchen. Come on up. Don't be a stranger. Well, it takes me a while to get Makia up at these stairs, and I walk into the house, and I turn to the right, and there she is. Well, sucking on a cigarette. Wow. Storytellers on tour. Who'd ever imagine something like that? And I'm like, uh-oh. the back of my spine is going off. I'm like, oh, whoa, 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 because I already know that lady. When my youngest daughter was in the 4th grade, everything was about whales. Whales this, we went looking for whales. We went out of the ocean of whales. Whales, went to read everything, books up there. Everything was about whales. And in the very farthest island in Laie of Oahu, there was an old building that had a big whale painted on it. Let's stop in, Dad. We're going by one day. We pull in. And this lady was the cashier. She told my daughter and I this long, tortured story about when she lived in Baja California, in a little town called Paradise, and how the big SUVs would go up and down the hill to the house on the top. It definitely wasn't local. It had a lot of money in it and a lot of people going late at night. And every now and then you'd hear gunshots, and every now and then you'd hear screaming. And when the house finally burned down and they went up there, they found the center of the house was there for torture. Blood. Lots of blood. And there she is. Well, I've got some stories to tell. Maybe you all have a little time. I wouldn't mind spinning one out here. Reminds me of the time. And I'm like, no, I think we got to go. We really got to. Come on, you guys. You got to go. We really got to go now. And Sandra's like, well, no, I really think I'd like to hear the yeah. You know, I've had a hard life. Things have not gone well, and I was under one of my spells. And I just couldn't get out of it. I couldn't shake it. Sometimes I can, but I've done things, and I'm not proud. And I just couldn't. I was living in New Orleans in a trailer then. And I'm like, uh-oh. You know how like when you're on a body surfing excavator, you're way on the back of a wave, and the wave is breaking and it's sucking you over, and you're going, no, 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 no. Yeah, I just couldn't shake it. That feeling that God didn't love me because of all the wrongs and sins in my life. I felt alone. And I needed to know that God did forgive me. Well, I decided tonight was the night. Hell or high water, live or die. I was going to put it all out, and I was going to test my God. I went out of that trailer. I just turned off all the lights, and I went walking down to the back gate. I opened it up, and I walked along the guardrail going towards the end of the street. You know, there was the freeway was going by, and there was lots of those 16-wheelers. Heavy traffic. And I came to the end of the guardrail, and there were some boys. Hey, what is it? Come on, down. And I started to walk down this pathway and go to sit by a fire. I know it was silly, but I was putting myself in the hand of God. I needed to know his love. And I went down by that fire and I sat down. And the boys were around. And across that fire, I saw a lady. A man, a lady, I don't know quite what, but she looked up, and there must have been a trick. Because in her eyes, all I saw was red. Red eyes and blackness. I don't know how the mind knows things, but I knew that she was a killer. And I said, I kill. I eat meat, so I kill to eat. She went. I kill, but I kill for fun. So listen up. This is how it's going to go, sweetie. You're going to have 3 chances, 3 sounds. 3 sounds going to go in your ears. If you can tell me one of them, I'll let you go. God loves you. You live your life, no problem. But I don't think you can guess them. not any one of the three of them. When that happens, then I'm going to give you to the boys, and they're going to have their fun. And we're all hungry. So listen up, sweetie. Close your eyes. Here's the first sound. And I heard this. Water. Water being stirred, maybe an oar. What kind of oar? I don't know what kind of oar, maybe a boat. Yeah, it's a boat with an oar. Well, what kind of boat? Where are they going? Where are they coming from? What's the river? I don't know those things. How would I know those things? You can't tell me, and I know you won't. You can't tell me that. It's Chiron. You know the one. He takes the people from the land of the living to the side for the dead. All the Egyptians knew him. Greeks knew him too. You know why they put the coins on the eyes of the dead? Chiron, to pay the ferryman. That's the sound. That's the oar. That's the river Styx. You haven't got a hope. Here comes the second one, sweetheart. Listen up now. And this is what I heard. Well, what do you hear? Stripping, tearing. They're chewing on something. What? What is it? What is it? I can't tell what the No. Didn't get that one either. It's the carrion crows tearing up the bodies that are put up in the trees. The dead are up there. The old people used to do that, all those old traditional people. And the carrion crows come and pick their eyes out. You know, the sign of thing, up their butt. Pull out their intestines. Well, you got one more chance, sweetheart. You better pray to your God. Come on now. Listen up good. And I did pray to God to have mercy, to be with me. Are you true? A lightning bolt came out. I knew what it was. And I spoke up. I said, I know what that is. That's the sound of the breath of life leaving the body. It's the last breath. But that is not the end of the story, for it's not my sound, for I inhale. Yes, there is death, but there is resurrection. And in that resurrection and coming back, as the breath comes back to life, I know that my Lord loves me, that God is a God of mercy and love. You have no power over me. I am saved. He's the power and the glory forever and ever and ever. Amen. Forever. He loves me. He does. And I walked up that path. Let him go. I walked up the path. I walked along the house. I came to the river. I came inside the fence. I went to my bed. I went and I put everything under the covers. I threw my covers over my head. I said, God, you love me. You love me. even a sinner as horrible as me. There is love and forgiveness. I said, we gotta go. And we got back in that van, and I don't remember anybody saying anything. We were all just stunned. It sat in my gray matter for 25 years until just this year. It came popping back in my head, out in my tongue. And what I have to tell you is just what happened in the garage sale. Testing God. Done.
Thank you, Jeff, for another wonderful story. And let's bring all the tellers back out again and give another big round of applause for Alton Chung, Kathy Collins, and Jeff Gear. It's been a fabulous night of stories for everyone, and I can't thank our tellers enough, and I can't thank our audience enough for sticking around with us for this wonderful way to celebrate Halloween this year. I want to say one more thank you to our sponsors, the National Endowment for the Arts, the Hawaii State Foundation of Culture and the Arts, Kainoa Senior Services, the University of Hawaii, and you, our audiences, for being here with us. So, one last word from the tellers. Anything?
Thank you, Tim.
Thanks,
you,
Tim.
Alton and Jeff. And happy birthday, Jeff.
Hey,
Happy birthday, Jeff.
Happy birthday, Jeff.
Thank you so very
So
much for
everyone
coming
out
and
there.
enjoying the stories.
Everyone
Aloha,
out
you guys.
there, if you haven't had your Halloween yet, then please go out.
Slow learner.
and have fun. Take care, everyone, and aloha.
Aloha.